This does not mean that the main issue has been resolved. The economic, commercial, and financial blockade, which causes huge human and economic losses to our country, has to come to an end.
Welcome back. We're talking about the historic meeting in Havana this week between U.S. and Cuban officials, focusing on the possible restoration of diplomatic ties between the two countries. Joining us from Miami is the director of the Institute for Cuban and Cuban-American Studies at the University of Miami, Jaime Suchlicki. And with us from Havana is the educator and Cuban diplomat, Carlos Alzugaray Treto. Gentlemen, thanks to both of you for joining us. Dr. Suchlicki, there we heard Raul Castro talk about the embargo against Cuba, saying that it's still in place. It remains, as he called it, one of the main issues that divides these two countries. And we know that President Obama, who wants to restore relations, can only act so much. There are limits to what he can do. Congress can only act to lift that embargo. Do you think the U.S. Congress will move on this?
No. I think especially under Republican control, the embargo will stay. The president may offer some more concessions to the Cuban government, but there is a sea of differences between U.S. and Cuban relations and problems. The Cubans want the removal of the embargo. They want Cuba to be removed from the list of terrorist countries. The U.S. government wants more freedom, respect for human rights in Cuba, payment for the properties that were confiscated in 1960. So there is a number of unsolved problems that are going to make very, very difficult the normalizations of relations.
Dr. Alzugaray, if that embargo stays in place, is that going to be a deal breaker? Are we going to just go back to where we are right now?
No, I think in Cuba, we see the embargo as something that has to go, but we realize the difficulties of getting rid of the embargo. I don't think it is a Republican-Democratic issue. There are many senators and representatives from Republican who would like to see the embargo go because their states would benefit from trade with Cuba. So I think that now that the president, remember, President Obama has been the first American president that has actually said that the embargo must go. This should be worth something, and I wouldn't be surprised if something happened, maybe not immediately, but over a period of time. Maybe in the next 2 years we will see that gone. But the decision of both presidents is to go ahead with the reestablishment of diplomatic relations. I would see that probably the issue of the list of terrorist states is a sticking point, but I don't see any problem with that because every expert agrees that Cuba should be taken off the list.
I think Cuba should remain in the list of terrorist states. Cuba supports Hamas, supports Iran, which is a terrorist state, is a close ally of Iran. Cuba also is close with Russia. In Venezuela, they're helping Iran and Venezuela to move in agents in the Caribbean and other parts. Cuba also has some ETA terrorists, not the ones that they agreed with the Spanish government, but others that are looked upon and chased by the Spanish government. They also have some terrorists from the United States hiding in Cuba. So I don't know that that is going to be that easy either.
Okay, let's move on to something else. Dr. Treto, Dr. Alzugaray, rather, it seems that the priority for the United States is to see some kind of political change in Cuba. It seems that the priority for Cuba is for their name to be taken off that list of terrorism, countries sponsoring terrorism, as well as to release political prisoners. Do you think the countries are on the same page here? Do they have the same priorities?
Well, obviously, there are differences between Cuba and the United States. I think the important thing of what happened yesterday is that the two sides sat down and talked about their differences. And I think this is important. I think President Raul Castro has said that we have to learn the art of living together with our differences. I am ready to live together with my differences with Dr. Suchlicki. I think that one of the things that has to be looked at on the issue of the terrorism list is the State Department, when they maintain Cuba on the list, it starts by saying the following phrase: there's no evidence that Cuba has any linkages to any terrorist organization. So it's obvious that Cuba has no linkage to terrorist organizations. The examples he put, some are, okay, some are his points of view. He has the right to have those points of view. But obviously, that's a decision that the U.S. State Department has to make, and I am pretty certain that it's going to be taken out of the list. On the issue of change, Cuba is changing. Cuba is changing on Cuban terms. Cuba doesn't disagree to talk with the United States about those changes, but the decision for those changes stays with the Cuban people and the Cuban government here in Havana.
Okay, Dr. Suchlicki, you know, when we look at that list of countries that sponsor terrorism, we just heard from the U.S. Congresswoman Barbara Lee, someone who is a strong advocate for the restoration of the relationship. She said in that interview I had with her, you cannot put Cuba and Syria on the same list.
Why not? Cuba has been a supporter of terrorism throughout the world for many years. They provide intelligence and help to Hamas and Hezbollah. Cuba has been a close ally of the FARC in Colombia. Cuba has supported terrorism in the United States. Okay, so what? All of a sudden, we're going to tell Cuba, look, you've been a bad boy for 20, 30 years, and now without any preconditions and without you providing any concession to the U.S., we're going to change our policy? Come on, that's not how the world works.
Dr. Alzugaray, do you want to respond to that?
No, we disagree, and I don't want to go into the disagreement. Basically, for example, Mr. Suchlicki talks about the support of FARC. Well, the Colombian government is very happy with the fact that Cuba is helping the Colombian government negotiate a peace deal with the FARC. So that's not supporting terrorism, that's supporting peace in Colombia.
Dr. Alzugaray, just one moment. I want you to take a listen to what the Republican Senator Marco Rubio said on the restoration of relations between Cuba and the United States. You know, as well as I do, that he is firmly opposed to this. Let's take a listen to what he said.
No one can cite for me, even to now, a single contemporary example of where a reluctant tyranny has turned into a democracy simply because you have more economic trade or more tourists visiting the island. I just think that the president here did not get enough concessions on democracy opening.
So the point there being made by Marco Rubio, Dr. Alzugaray, is that, you know, you can have more trade, you can have more tourism, but he's never come across a situation like that which changes the political structure inside a country, changes the politics of the country. Does he have a point?
Well, I think he has a point in certain parts of U.S. political culture, but I would challenge the idea that the United States has the right to decide what type of democracy exists in other countries. Every country has its own political system, and I believe that we have democracy in Cuba, our way of democracy. We have to have it that way, but that's not the point. The United States has normal diplomatic relations with China, which has a political system similar to the one we have in Cuba. So what's the problem? The problem is that the relationship between Cuba and the United States was an anomaly because the United States kept pressuring Cuba to change under coaction. Well, it hasn't worked. So let's have a normal relationship and see what happens.
So there you have it, Dr. Suchlicki and Dr. Alzugaray telling us there that no country has the right to impose a political system on another country.
That's correct. That's correct. And then no country has an obligation to trade, do business, and invest with any country. So if the Cuban government wants American trade, American tourists, investments, loans, taking out of the list of terrorist states, they got to give. And if they think they're not going to give, and the U.S. is the only one that they're going to give, this is not going to get anywhere.
Dr. Alzugaray, looking at the people inside Cuba, how much support is there for this restoration? I mean, do people generally support what is going on?
I think so. The fact of the matter is that even though we have suffered from the embargo, and remember, the blockade was originally decided, and this is a direct quote from State Department document of the 1960s, bring about hunger, desperation, and the overthrow of the Cuban government. That hasn't happened. What has happened is that the Cuban Revolution enjoys support because the Cuban government has achieved two of the main purposes that Cuba had over the years: to achieve independence from the United States and a valid statutory international relations. Cuba is right now a very important member of the international community. Every country in the world has normal diplomatic relations with Cuba, and we even cooperate on humanitarian issues like the Ebola crisis in Africa. So that's one point. The other point is that Cuba has a very extensive and widely recognized system of better education, better public health, and we enjoy it, and we think that is good. We have problems with the economy. Raul Castro has said it. We have problems with our institutions. Yes, we have to continue changing our political institution to become more democratic. Nobody in Cuba would challenge that. I am part of the editorial board of a journal called Temas. Every month we have a public discussion on a public issue with total freedom of opinion.
The embargo is not or the blockade, like the Cubans call it, is not the cause of the suffering of the Cuban people. The causes of the economic disaster that is Cuba today is the result of a government, is the result of a system that doesn't work. Like the Soviet system didn't work, like the Eastern European doesn't work, the economic system of Cuba doesn't work. It is not the embargo the reasons Cuba doesn't have potato and don't have milk.
Okay, gentlemen, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks for joining us. That is all the time we have, but the conversation continues online. Join us on CCTV America's Facebook page to comment on this or any other show, or chat with us on Twitter at CCTV_America. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.